All right, let's talk about cloud security. But instead of getting lost in a bunch of technical jargon, we're going to look at it through a really simple lens. What if your little piece of the cloud was just a high-tech apartment, and you were the tenant? So, come on, let's grab the keys and take a look around.
You hear it all the time, right? The cloud is a fortress, built by these tech giants with basically unlimited security budgets. And that leads to a pretty big question. Is it really the safest place you could possibly put your data? Well, the answer, it's a little more complicated than you might think. The image we have of a data breach is usually something straight out of a movie. This brilliant hacker in a dark room, just smashing through layers and layers of digital defense. But the reality? It is so much less dramatic. The #1 cause of major cloud breaches isn't some complex genius attack. Nope, it's the digital equivalent of just leaving your front door unlocked.
So to really understand how these unlocked doors happen, we need to stick with that powerful analogy we started with. Your space in the cloud isn't some vague, abstract server. Think of it as your apartment.
It's really that simple. Just picture this massive, cutting-edge apartment building. The company that built it and runs the whole thing, your Amazons, your Googles, your Microsofts, they're the landlord. And you, the customer who's using their services, you're the tenant, renting a space inside.
Now, every time you rent an apartment, you get a rental agreement, right? A lease that spells out exactly who's responsible for what. In the cloud, this is called the shared responsibility model, and I'm telling you, it is the single most important concept in all of cloud security. You have to get this.
So what are the terms of this digital lease? Well, the landlord, that's the cloud provider, is responsible for the security of the building itself. We're talking the physical data centers, the concrete, the networking, the power grid, the whole foundation. But you, the tenant, you are responsible for what happens inside your own apartment. You're the one who has to lock your door, you decide who gets a key, and you have to make sure your valuables are secure. And that's your data, your applications, and your configurations.
So, the whole thing boils down to this. It's a mantra you'll hear from every single major provider. They take care of securing their massive global infrastructure, which is the cloud. But you are always responsible for securing your stuff in the cloud. Forgetting this one simple rule is the root cause of most of the major breaches you read about in the news.
And hey, just like with real estate, you can choose different kinds of rentals. You could rent a totally empty space and do all the work yourself. That's what we call infrastructure as a service. Or you could get a furnished place, a platform as a service, where the basics are all handled for you. Or you could just book a full-service hotel room. That's software as a service, and just show up and use the amenities. Now, in each case, the more the landlord provides, the less you have to manage. But here's the kicker. No matter which one you choose, you are still the one responsible for locking your own door. Okay, now that we understand the rental agreement, let's look at the most common ways tenants accidentally leave their front door, their windows, and even their safes wide open for anyone to just walk into. These are the kinds of misconfigurations that make the headlines.
Let's kick things off with the most famous mistake of all. This is the digital version of moving into your beautiful new apartment and just leaving the front door swinging open for the whole world to peek inside.
In the cloud, this is the infamous public S3 bucket. A team uploads a bunch of sensitive data, backups, customer info, internal documents, into a storage container, and then, with just a single wrong click, makes it readable by anyone on the entire internet. Now, what's just wild about this is how simple the fix is. There is literally a setting called block public access. You turn it on, that's it. It's like having a deadbolt installed by default, and all you have to do is use it.
Okay, next up is a classic security mistake we've all been warned about since we were kids. You would never hide your house key under the doormat, right? Because that is the very first place a burglar is going to look.
So the cloud equivalent of this is embedding your keys, your credentials and API keys directly into your code, and then uploading that code to a public place like GitHub. Attackers run automated bots 24/7, just scanning for exactly this mistake. So what's the proper fix? Well, don't hide the key under the mat. Put it in a digital safe, something we call a dedicated secrets manager.
Our third common mistake is all about being a little too trusting, a little too convenient. Imagine you hired a plumber to fix a leaky sink, but instead of just giving them a key for the bathroom, you gave them the master key to every single apartment in the entire building. Super convenient for sure, but incredibly risky. This is exactly what happens when you grant administrator access, the master key, to an application or a user just because it's easier than figuring out the exact limited permissions they actually need.
The solution is a fundamental rule of security, the principle of least privilege. You only grant the absolute minimum access required for a job to be done, no more and no less.
So we've covered the tenant's mistakes, but the way the landlord actually designs the apartments, that also impacts security. So let's take a quick look at the building's blueprint. The two main architectural styles you'll see are virtual machines and containers.
Okay, a virtual machine, or a VM, is like a completely separate, soundproofed apartment. It's got its own walls, its own plumbing, its own operating system. This gives you really strong isolation. A container, on the other hand, is more like renting a single room inside a larger shared suite. This makes containers way lighter and faster, but the isolation, it isn't quite as strong. Because you're sharing that hallway, the operating system kernel, there's a risk of something called a container escape, and that's like a noisy neighbor breaking through their wall into the shared suite, putting everyone else's room at risk.
Okay, so you've locked your door and you understand the building's layout. But a truly smart tenant, they don't just stop there. They install their own security system to get real visibility into what's happening inside their apartment.
And this is just a brilliant illustration of how cloud tools map to real-world security. Think of services like CloudTrail as your security cameras. They record every single action, every door opening, every window being checked. Then you've got services like GuardDuty, which are like motion detectors, automatically spotting unusual behavior. And finally, you need a central alarm panel to bring all those alerts together. In the tech world, that's called a SIM. It lets you see the whole picture and connect the dots between what might seem like isolated events.
You know, putting all of this together leads us to a final, really crucial idea. Being secure in the cloud isn't just about a checklist of fixes. It's a complete shift in your mindset. It's moving away from just blindly trusting the landlord to a philosophy of verifiable trust. The smart tenant lives by 4 key principles. First, they automate everything. They don't just lock the door by hand. They write code that ensures the door is always locked, no matter what. Second, they encrypt everything, putting their valuables in a safe whether they're at home or on the move. Third, they audit continuously. They don't just check the locks one time, they're constantly looking for unlocked doors and windows. And finally, and this one's huge, they assume breach. They design their apartment so that if someone does get in, the damage is contained to just a single room.
So in the end, the cloud providers really have built an incredible fortress. They've secured the foundation, the walls, the whole perimeter. But security is a shared duty. They've given you a state-of-the-art apartment, but it's up to you to be a smart tenant. Which leaves us with just one final question to think about. Your cloud might be a fortress, but did you remember to check the windows?